Good morning, dear students. Welcome to GC Advanced Level by Sir Moses. Today, we're going to tackle an important exercise. Today, we're going to look at all the marking guides of the Southwest Regional Mock GC Examination March 2022. We equally want to thank the Southwest Regional Association for providing us with the question papers and the marking guide. I am not the owner of this particular marking guide. It is the Association of the Southwest Teacher who brought out this marking guide, and I thought it wiser to share with you people for those who never had the opportunity to have the paper. Good. Once more again, welcome, and let us start immediately with what is mainly concerned. Take note, in the video uploaded yesterday, I gave you the technique and the various topics on the various questions, how you were to prepare yourself. And I told you that Cameroon History Paper 2 is divided into 12 questions, and the 12 questions is divided into 3 sections, section A, B, and C. And each of the sections have 4 topics or 4 questions, pardon. Now, question 1, as I told you, question 1 is either population movement or state and kingdom. Now, let's examine the question 1 of the Southwest Regional Mock March 2022. It came under population movement. And the question says, to what extent were human factors responsible for population movement in Cameroon during the 19th century? Now, our key term here that will enable us to interpret the question very well is the word to what extent. Dear candidate, whenever you have the word to what extent, take note that question will always be what? A two-sided question. Now, another key term here, we have human factors. When we talk about human factors, these are factors caused by man, right? So the interpretation of this question will be that it's a two-sided question centered on the causes of population movement. The first part of this question will center on the human factors of population movement, and the second part of this question will focus on the non-human factors of population movement. For example, part 1 of this question, right, will focus on human factors like the Jihads of Adamawa, which cause or force some tribes like the Massa, the Tupuri, the Musgum, and the Mundang to move hilly region, while the Tikars, the Mvute and Gbaya migrated southwards. You also have another human factors, intertribal wars. Example, the Nkar War, the Bamileke Chamba War of 1835, the Bamileke War. You have the dynastic quarrel or succession dispute, which led to the founding of tribes like the Nkar, Bamum, and the Bali. You have payment of tribute. Payment of tribute. Examples of tribes that migrated because of this payment of tribute. You have the Mvute, Tingoh, Obang, who moved from Bafut. You have the Gbaya who escaped from Fulani tribute and moved from Adamawa to the South East of Cameroon. Then you have resistance to Allied rule or alien rule. Example, that's resistance to German colonial rule. Example, you have the Widikum to Bali. You also have the Bakweri. Good. After this now, you have fought. Come living Babisi to Lecom, you have search for peace. Usually after war, you have example, the Kiddies to the mountain region. You have the search for fertile land. Example, the Bamileke to the Mbo plain. You have the search for grazing land. The Fulani move from the Lake Chad region to Adamawa region. You have population pressure leading to the split of Tikars into several groups and movement to the western grassland. Example, you have the South Bamum, the Com Bamileke. You have cultural similarity. You have cultural similarity like the Nkar and Bamum, the Douala Bakweri. Then you have the hunting and fishing activities. You have jobs opportunities, trade opportunity. These were all human factors. These were all human what? Factors. Now, you move now to part 2. Part 2 talks about other factors, that is non-human factors. Non-human factors, for example, like climatic changes in North Cameroon. You have the influence of water bodies. You have the desire of natural protection, natural calamity, right? You have attraction of soil spring, influence of mountain or topography. geography. So the first part of this question, you have to discuss on the human factors. That is factor caused by people, factor that were really caused by people to move, right? And the second part of this question, you have to discuss on the non-human factor, that is natural factors, like geographical factors, those factors that were already present, but that influence people to migrate. Good. After the first question now of the March 2022 Southwest Regional Mock, we move to question 2 of the Southwest Regional Mock paper 2, which says, examine the motives and impact of the implanting of the London Baptist Missionary Society in Cameroon. This is the question here, underlined in blue. Now, they say examine the motives and the impact. So that word motive, I can change the word motive now to what? Reason, right? So my question, I will change the word impact to what? Consequences. So indirectly, the question will be this: examine the reasons and the consequences of the implanting of what the London Baptist Missionary Society in Cameroon in 1884. Good. Because of this now, the interpretation of this question is that it's a two-sided question, right? Focus on the motives and the impact of the implanting of London Baptist Missionary in Cameroon. Part 1 will focus on the reasons or motive for the establishment of the London Baptist Missionary in Cameroon. And part 2 will focus on the impact, consequences, or effects of this establishment of the London Baptist Missionary in Cameroon. Part 1, some motives include, for example, you have the desire to spread Christianity, which was the main motive of the London Baptist Missionary in Cameroon. You have to atone for European crimes against Cameroonians during the period of slave trade. You also have to, they came to civilize Cameroonians who were considered primitive. They came to check the spread of diseases like malaria, to put a stop or an end to inhuman practices, example, murder of twins, human sacrifice, to introduce Western crops and technique of agriculture, to improve on transport and communication network, and lastly, to prepare the ground for the British annexation of Cameroon. These were the motives or reasons for the coming of the London Baptist Missionary in Cameroon for the first part. And part 2, we talk about the impact. Now, the impact here is divided into religious consequences, social consequences, and economic plus political consequences. Starting with a religious consequence. One of the religious consequences of the introduction of the London Baptist or the establishment of the London Baptist Missionary Society in Cameroon was the opening of mission stations as Jubilee Mission in Bimbia, for example, in 1884 by Joseph Mary, and the Bethel Mission in Douala by Alfred Seka in 1845. You have the translation and printing of version of the Bible into local languages, example, Isubu by Joseph Mary and Douala by Alfred Seka. You have baptism and conversion of the indigenous into Christianity at the expense of traditional religion. You have the founding of Victoria in 1858 as a religious colony for their followers. These were part of the religious consequences of the establishment of the London Baptist Missionary in Cameroon. And in the social consequences, you had the opening of schools where Cameroonians were taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, including religious instruction. You have training Cameroonians to become what? Mason, carpenter, guardians. You have introduction of modern method of construction to the market and use of brick. You have suppression of slave trade and slaving through preaching. You have fought against negative practices such as human sacrifice and killing of twins. Good. You have opening of dispensary and health centers to provide health care and fight against diseases like malaria. Opening the immediate interior through footpath to link the mission station. Destruction of indigenous cultures and value. Condemn and discourage indigenous religious practices. Condemn and discourage polygamy. After seeing the social consequence, you move to examine the economic consequence. You have modernization of agriculture through the technique of modern technique, through the teaching of modern technique, pardon. You have the introduction of fruit crops such as pear, mangoes, and pawpaw. You have contribution to the promotion of legitimate trade by establishment of shops. You have introduced Cameroonians fast into the production of goods demand abroad, seizure of indigenous land. Then in the political domain, yeah, we are talking about now influence the coastal chiefs to express their desire for British annexation of Cameroon, pave the way for the scramble and eventual annexation of Cameroon, the creation of stable and peaceful environment through Victoria. You have act as advisory to local rulers, brought an end to inter-villages wars along the coast, and provoked the scramble for an annexation of Cameroon. Good. This, right, were reason for the first part why the London Baptist missionary came to Cameroon. Take note, this is the introduction again here. The introduction painter here. Reason why, they say it's a two-sided question, focus on first part, reason why the London Baptist missionary came to Cameroon, and the second part, why the consequences of their coming to Cameroon. Now, question 3 of the paper of March 2022, Southwest Regional Mock says, why were Cameroonians justified in resisting German colonial administration from 1884 to 1914? This is a question here, that were Cameroonians justified in resisting German colonial administration from 1884 to 1914. Good. What is the interpretation here? The interpretation here is simple. It is not complicated. The interpretation is straightforward. A straightforward question, right? Center on the reasons for Cameroonian resistance to German rule. That is a straightforward question. Center on the reason why Cameroonian resisted the German rule. Yeah, we are just writing on what? One-sided. It's simple. It's a one-sided question. Center on the reason why Cameroonian resisted the German. For example, the reason for the resistance, you had rejection of the annexation treaty of 1884 signed between the Douala kings and the German ruler. You have the seizure of indigenous land by the Germans. You have heavy and unpopular taxes imposed on the people. You have German harsh labor policy on the Bangwa Bakweri, push this tribe to resist them. You have interference in chieftaincies matter. Example, impose Chief or Charles Atangan as a chief on Owondo. Disrespect for local dignity, flogging of a Sonoel Vok Besi clan. You have interference in indigenous cultural practices, sexual misbehavior of the Germans with the native married women. Example, Betty Revolt. You have the loss of the middleman monopoly of trade, immoral attitude of German administrator. Example, Putkama. Imposition of cultivation of cash crop like oil, palm, right? Example, the Manfe resistance. There you have the rejection of Alliance rule. Example, Bafut, Manko, and Saul resistance. Conflict between Islam and Christianity. These were reasons for resistance against German colonial administration in Cameroon. We move to question 4. Question 4 of March 2022 Southwest Regional Mock. Question 4 says, account for the initial defeat and eventual triumph of the Allies during the First World War in Cameroon. Good. This question is not complicated, dear student. Whenever you have the word account for, the word account for means reason. So I will change the question and put it this way. Accounts for the initial defeat and eventual victory of the Allies during the First World War in Cameroon. Now, this question, right, is a two-sided question, right? Part 1 will center on the reason for the initial defeat of the Allies in the First World War. That is, part 1 will center on the reason why the Allies never defeated the Germans easily in Cameroon, or reason why the Germans resisted the Allies for so long. And part 2 will center on the reason why the Allies finally defeated the Germans, or center on the reason for the Allied victory in the war. Good. So part 1 will focus on the reason why Germany resisted the Allied for so long. That is what they say here. Reason for the initial Allied defeat. The reason for the initial Allied defeat is reason why Germany resisted the Allied for so long. Example, Germans had a well-trained and equipped army. The Germans made use of reserve forces they had in the territory. German exploration and wars made them more familiar with the terrain. At the beginning, the Allied powers were divided, unlike the Germans who were united under Colonel Zimmermann. German forces received weapon infantry who the territory from Spanish Guinea. The German Africans troops were better trained. Some tribes like the Ewondo, Bali, and Bamum supported the Germans. The Germans had military bases all over the territory. The Allies could not easily recruit porters, scouts, and informants. You had several rainfall and marshes terrain prevented the Allied troops from movement, since most of the initial fighting was brought between August and September during the heavy period of rainfall. Example, the Sanaga battle. You have lack of motorable routes prevented easy Allied penetration. The Germans make good use of transmission stations like in Douala to send instruction to their forces in Gawa, Manfe. Then you have now part 2, reason for the eventual victory of the Allied, or reason why Germany was finally defeated. You have to start. Allied troops were numerically superior than the German troops in Cameroon. The Allied attacked the German from several fronts or directions. Allied troops were later united and coordinated under one commander known as General Charles Dubel. The German force were exhausted by the long wars of resistance they had fought in Cameroon. The German had short of ammunition since they could not get in more reinforcement following the capture of the port of Douala. Some tribes supported the Allied powers, example, the Doualas. You have the strategic of the three-front attack on Yaoundé, deprived the German of Ewondo support. German forces in Cameroon fought mostly a defensive battle. Allied blockage of German Cameroon prevented it from having reinforcement or supply from outside. German forces were cut off from their motherland. Support received from the Allied colonies in Africa, right? E.g., you have Nigeria, French Equatorial Africa, French West Africa who gave support to the Allied. Good. So the first part of this question, I repeat, the first part of this question to give reason why the German resisted the Allied for so long, and the second part of this question, you were to give reason why the Allied finally defeated the German, or reason why Germany was finally defeated. The next question, question 5, right, falls under section B of Cameroon history. How far did French rule in French Cameroon uphold the terms of the mandate agreement? Dear candidate, whenever you see the word how far, just note that that question is a two-sided question. Now, the question is simple. A two-sided question, right? Focus on the terms of the mandate, or focus on the respect of the terms of the mandate. Part 1, we focus on the provision of the mandate that were respected by the French. And part 2, we focus on the terms of the mandate that were never respected by the French. So part 1, provision upheld or respected by the French. For example, the French carry out great socio-economic development in Cameroon. France allowed freedom of conscience and worship in Cameroon in many different missionaries' bodies operating freely in the territory, right? France outlawed the creation of military base in the territory. France fought against the slave trade, slavery, arms, and drug traffic. France governed French Cameroon as part of French Equatorial Africa. The French France was used in the territory. France presented annual report to the Council of the League of Nations. France maintained peace and order, good governance in the territory. France promoted the material and moral well-being and social progress of the inhabitants. France created health center, hospital, elementary school. France had full powers of administration and legislation. France protected the indigenous from fraud and traffic in arms and ammunition. So the first part, you were to give how France respected the terms of the mandate. And the second part, you have to give how France never respected the terms of the mandate, which were, for example, France did not respect native laws and customs through the introduction of assimilation and association. France practiced forced labor, example, corvée and prestation. France did not allow other countries to have access to trade in the territory. She maintained economic monopoly in Cameroon. France did not ensure complete freedom of worship. For instance, she interfered into the activities of the native Baptist church led by Pastor Lotin Sama in Douala. France violated the clause of setting up of military force by recruiting Cameroonians into the Second World War, and the port of Douala was used as a tourist point during the war. So the first part of this question, take note, the first part of this question 5, which says, how far did French rule in Cameroon, French Cameroon, uphold the terms of the Mandate Agreement? The first part of this question, you have to give the provision that were respected by the French during the Mandate system in Cameroon, and the second part, the provision that were never respected by the French. Good. Now, question 6, how beneficial was the British policy of indirect rule to the indigenous population of the Cameroon province during the Mandate era? Good. Take note again. You have the word how far, how beneficial, how successful. Once you see this type of question with this word, note that those questions are two-sided questions. Now, this question, question 6, how beneficial was the British policy of indirect rule to the indigenous people of the Cameroon province during the Mandate A? This question is a two-sided question, centered on the benefit and the failure of the policy of indirect rule. Part 1 is centered on the benefit, and part 2 is centered on the disadvantages or failure of indirect rule. I repeat, a two-sided question centered on the advantages and disadvantages of indirect rule. Part 1 will focus on the benefits or advantages of indirect rule, and part 2 will focus on the disadvantages or failure of indirect rule. So part 1, benefit or advantage of indirect rule, like for example, encourage socio-economic development through the creation and maintenance of roads, schools, health centers. You have facilitated revenue collection by the native authority, ensure the settling of dispute in conformity with native laws and custom, preserve native custom and tradition, train the native in the art of modern government, make chief to be important in the political structure of government, laying the foundation of the creation of the House of Chiefs, created a spirit of community development in some forest region. It abolished and stopped the inhuman practices of the native, bringing an end to hanging, torture, provided opportunity of the native to express their opinion with regard to management of their area. It also led to it created what? A cordial working relationship between the native and the British, hence avoiding protest and resistance, helped to cut down administrative expenses. Now, part 2, you are talking about the disadvantages or failure of indirect rule. Part 2, for example, the merging of ethnic groups across conflict. Example, the Gemba were placed under the Bali Native Authority area. The Bangwa were placed under the Mvute Native Authority area. They disapproved this. Native Authority paid more allegiance to the British administrator than the natives. It resulted to the neglect of the Western educated elite as they were ignored. It led to the use of an unqualified personnel who were loyal to the British. It could not work smoothly in some decentralized society in the forest region due to lack of centralized chiefs. It hindered the execution of heavy development projects such as railways, electricity, because of lack of funds. It discouraged the growth of the rise of nationalism in southern Cameroon. Good. So part 1 of this question, take note that how beneficial was the British policy of indirect rule to the indigenous population during the province whatsoever, right? Now, this question, right, I repeat again, a two-sided question. Part 1, focus on the advantages of indirect rule. Part 2 is going to focus on the disadvantages of indirect rule. Now, we'll move now to question 7. Question 7, right? Under what circumstances did Ahmadu Ahidjo rise to power in 1958, and how did his government attempt to tackle problem in French Cameroon between 1958 and 1960? Good. Now we are under question 7, and question 7, remember with the video I uploaded yesterday, says that it falls under French trusteeship. Now the question says, under what circumstances, well, change your what circumstances to what event, under what event did Ahmadu Ahidjo rise to power in 1958, power to as what? Prime Minister, and how did his government attempted to tackle problem in French Cameroon between 1958 and 1960? A two-sided question. Part one is based on the circumstance or event for the rise of Tupuri of Ahmadu Ahidjo, and part two is on Ahidjo's attempt to tackle problems in French Cameroon. So part one is going to focus on circumstances of Ahidjo's rise to power. Example, you have the passing of the Loi Cadre, you have the disintegration of the Bloc Democratic Cameroonais and the creation of the UC, Union Camerounaise. You have the holding of the December 1956 election and the UC majority in Alcam. You had in April 1957, French Cameroon was granted a new statute which endowed the treaty with a constitution and election of Ahidjo as president of Alcam. You have appointment of Bida as prime minister. You have increase in UPC violence. You have the Abomba Declaration of January 1958. You have Bida fell out with French Commissioner Jean Remedier and mastermind the collapse of Bida government. You have the resignation of Ahidjo and UC minister from Bida government, and you have the appointment of Ahidjo as prime minister. So the first part, you have to give the circumstance that led to the rise of Ahidjo as prime minister. Now, part two, you are going to give the measure taken by President Ahmadu Ahidjo to tackle the problems that were faced in French Cameroon. Right? You are talking how Ahidjo handled the problem that confronted him. For example, the UPC problem. Ahidjo offered conditional amnesty to the UPC, and in September 1958, Mahi Matip and 3,000 UPC rebels laid down their arms in the Sanaga Maritime. Ahidjo used force to crush the radical UPC faction led by Dr. Roland Felix Momi. Ahidjo facilitated the division within the rank of the UPC into the legal UPC exile and UPC and rebel UPC. This weakened the strength and influence of the UPC. Independence. Ahidjo negotiated with France and UNO, and in 1959, French Cameroon had a new statute which separated it from France. The territory had independence on the 1st January 1960, right? You have the reunification. Ahidjo negotiated with Jongo Foncha, the KNDP leader and prime minister of the Southern Cameroon, on the issue of reunification. Good. Ahidjo adopted the policy of national reconciliation. He formed a coalition government with the support of the GAN, PI, and the UC, which laid the foundation of the North-South Alliance. Good. Now, move now to question 8. Examine the various options for British Southern Cameroon's independence and explain why the reunification emerged victorious in the 1961 UN conducted plebiscite. Now, examine the various options for British Southern Cameroon's independence and explain why the reunification emerged victorious in the 1961 UN conducted plebiscite. This question is not complicated, dear student, as it is a two-sided question on the independence struggle of British Southern Cameroon. Part one is centered on the various options for independence, and part two treat the reason for the success of the reunification. So part one, you have various options for British Southern Cameroon's independence. For example, independent by joining the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That's integration with Nigeria propagated by the CPNC of Ndele. You have the separation from Nigeria and deciding the future of the territory as a later date as championed by the KNDP. You have the reunification with the Republic of Cameroon adopted by the KNDP, and you have the independence of the territory as a separate entity emphasized by the KUP and the CCC. Now, part two is going to focus on reason for the success of the reunificationist. You have, for example, the Cameroon idea was popular among Southern Cameroon. That is what Cameroon, as before the mandate or before the First World War. Historical link and tribal affiliation of Southern Cameroon, such as the Mbo, Bakosi, Balong, with the Bangwa, was with the Republic of Cameroon. You have Igbophobia, fear of Igbo domination. You have the need to dismantle trade barrier between Southern Cameroon and the Republic of Cameroon. You have British socio-economic neglect and relative economic prosperity in the Republic of Cameroon. Communication possibility with the Republic of Cameroon. Influence of other pro-unification parties such as the UPC and the OK. Nigerian domination of the territory. British administrative treatment of the Southern Cameroon, making it look like a colony subjected to Nigerian government. Support from French Cameroonian politicians such as Paul Sopot-Priso, Ahmadu Ahidjo. Good. So this part you have to give the various option option for the British Southern Cameroon for the first part, and the second part you have to give reason for the success of the reunification. Now we move now to question 9. Question 9 is section C, Cameroon history. Now the question 9 says, why was the federal system of government adopted in Cameroon in 1961, and what factor made its dissolution inevitable in 1972? This question is not complicated, dear student, as it is first part focused on the reason for the establishment of the federal system in 1961, and part 2 is focused on the reason for the dissolution in 1972. That is, the second part is going to focus on reason for the introduction of the unitary system, and the first part is focused on the reason for the adoption of the federal system in 1961, and the second part, why this federal system was abolished or reason why the unitary system was established. Part 1, for example, reason for the adoption of the federal system. You have the concept of federation was in line with the pre-plebiscite negotiation between Ahidjo and Foncha. You had the two Cameroon had been separated and administered differently for 45 years. Southern Cameroon parliamentary system based on the Anglo-Saxon system of government was opposed to the presidential system that was practiced in the Republic of Cameroon. Hence, there was a need for the introduction of the federal system. Differences in educational system, advice from the Afro-Asian bloc in the UNO, advice from the British expert, political and administrative differences, differences in economic development, right? So this made it possible for the introduction of the federal system for the first part. And the second part, the reason for the dissolution of the federal system in 1972, or reason for the introduction of the unitary system. You have the expensive nature of the federal system. You have the federal system entail a lot of wastage, that is duplication of services, to consolidate national unity and integration, to solve the problem of financial difficulties of West Cameroon, to consolidate Ahidjo dictatorship, autocratic regime, and conservation of power. Unitary state was a logical sequence of the single party system. Fear that West Cameroon might copy the secessionist tendency of the Biafra. Discovery of oil deposit in West Cameroon in 1961. Support for unitarism by some personality and ethnic groups that were marginalized and victim by the KNDP government. To promote bilingualism. So these were the reason why it led to the dissolution of the federal system, or it led to the introduction of the unitary system. So I repeat back this question. Why was the federal system of government adopted in Cameroon in 1961? And what factor made its dissolution inevitable in 1972? So the first part of this question, you have to give reason for the adoption of the federal system. And the second part of this question, you have to give reason for the introduction of the unitary system, or reason why the federal system was abolished. Now, question 10 is under the KNDP. Discuss the source of conflict within the KNDP and its consequences from 1963 to 1965. This question is not complicated. It's a straightforward question, right? A double focus question with emphasis on the source of conflict within the KNDP in the first part, and its consequence in the second part. Now, part 1, source of conflict within the KNDP, right? For example, you have dissatisfaction over the failure to secure a loose federation, mass inflows of people within the ambition into the KNDP, life leadership of Foncha in the KNDP, vacancy to the post of the Prime Minister of West Cameroon following the federal constitution, power struggle over the post of the Vice President of the KNDP and Prime Minister of West Cameroon, struggle for the post of Secretary General of the KNDP following the death of Jase Ambendong, refusal of Muna and Ebe to accept defeat, and there are instances that the federal president had the right to appoint anybody within the party as Prime Minister of West Cameroon, the 1946 KNDP Convention in Kumba, and disagreement over the amendment of the KNDP Constitution. So the first part of this question, right, the source, you're talking about what the causes of the KNDP, causes of the KNDP. Now, part 2 is going to focus on the consequences of the KNDP. You have the dismissal of some members from the KNDP. You have the creation of the CUC. You have greatly weakened the KNDP. That is, the KNDP lost absolute majority in the West Cameroon House of Assembly because many people, because 8 people left the party. The KNDP compelled to form an alliance with the CPNC government and parliament, facilitated Ahidjo's move towards a one-party system, threatened Foncha position within the KNDP, made Ahidjo's case for the dissolution of the federal system stronger. Crisis created tension and confusion in West Cameroon House of Assembly. Crisis increased the popularity of Joa within the KNDP. personality conflict developed between Joa and Muna. So the first part of this question, right? The first part of this question we see is discuss the source of conflict within the KNDP and its consequences from 1963 to 1965. So the first part of this question is focused on the causes of the KNDP, and the second part is focused on the consequences of the KNDP. Good. Dear student, I will stop here as question 11 and question 12 will be sent to the next videos. As you can see the question 12 down here, you have question 12 and you have question 11. This was presented to you by Sir Moses. This was presented to you by Sir Moses. Please make good use of this and wait for possible questions under population movement, state and kingdom, Jihad of Modibo Adama, Christian missionaries, scramble for Cameroon, First World War, condominium and partition. I promise you all the questions under this particular topic. The only thing you need to do is to press the button right that is there to subscribe to know when I'm going to load these videos. GCE is our own this year, right? A grade is guaranteed. It is sure. A grade is very, very sure, as we are going to shock every person that will not listen to this video. Good. Equally, for those who wish to continue their classes, after their exam, those who wish to continue in the medical field, you are free to contact St. Austin Medical Center or medical health institution, whereby they will train you on the medical field very well for you to be able to start a professional jobs in the medical field. Thank you once more. If you wish to join my WhatsApp group, it is 681350328, presented to you by Sir Moses.